I was at a thrift store on a Tuesday afternoon, and I wasn't even looking for anything in particular. I was just wandering, the way you do when you're avoiding going home to an empty apartment and a life that doesn't quite feel like yours. The book section was in the back corner, dusty and forgotten, and that's where I found it. A leather photo album, burgundy with tarnished silver clasps, sitting on a shelf between two boxes of old National Geographic magazines. I don't know why I picked it up. Usually I don't buy things like that. Old photos feel like trespassing on someone else's memories. But something about it called to me, and I opened it without really thinking about what I was doing. The photographs were old, maybe 15, 20 years old. Faded color prints and some Polaroids. They showed a woman's life. Different seasons, different locations. The same face aging gradually across the pages. She looked kind. There was something gentle about her smile, even in the casual snapshots. Birthday parties, vacations, a garden in spring, ordinary moments captured in ordinary time. And then I turned a page, and my entire body went cold. It was me. Not almost me, not similar. It was undeniably, impossibly me. Same face, same birthmark on my collarbone visible in the edge of the frame, same scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike at age 7. I was standing in what looked like a basement. The lighting was dim, fluorescent, and I was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, clothes I didn't recognize. And I was smiling, but it wasn't a real smile. It was the kind of smile you make when someone tells you to smile, when you don't have a choice. The date was printed on the bottom of the photo in faded ink, July 14th, 1998. That was the day I disappeared. I know that sounds impossible. I know how that sounds, but let me explain. When I was 13 years old, I vanished for exactly 48 hours. I was walking home from school, and somewhere between the crosswalk and my house, roughly 4 blocks, I ceased to exist. My mother called the police. They organized search parties. My face was on the local news. And then 2 days later, I was found walking along the highway outside the city limits, with no memory of where I'd been. No explanation for the gap in my timeline. I was examined by doctors. They found nothing physically wrong. No evidence of abuse, no trauma markers. The police investigated, but I couldn't tell them anything because I genuinely didn't remember. It was like someone had taken an eraser to my mind and deleted 48 hours of my life. My parents never pushed too hard after that. The official story became that I'd run away, gotten scared, and come back. Teenage dramatics. Nothing sinister, nothing worth investigating further. But I knew it wasn't that simple. I knew something had happened, even if I couldn't articulate what. For years afterward, I had dreams, or nightmares, I was never sure which. Fragmented images of a concrete room, the smell of bleach, a voice, male, patient, calming, saying something I couldn't quite make out. I'd wake up gasping and the feeling would fade, leaving only a vague sense of wrongness I couldn't quite name. By the time I was in high school, the dreams had largely stopped. Compartmentalized. I told myself I was fine, that whatever had happened wasn't worth dwelling on, that I'd moved forward and that was what mattered. I built a life. I went to college. I got a job. I became someone who was whole and functional and perfectly, carefully normal. And then I found that photograph. My hands were shaking as I brought the album to the register. The cashier, an older man with kind eyes, didn't seem to find anything unusual about my purchase. He rang it up without comment. I paid, left the store, and sat in my car for an hour, just staring at that photograph, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with the narrative I'd built for myself. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into my old email account, an account I'd kept but rarely used, and I went through my sent messages from 1998. I found it. An email my mother had written to my uncle the day after I came back. It read, "She keeps talking about a room with no windows. She says there were books on the walls, but they weren't real. She says a man kept asking her questions, but she didn't want to answer. She won't say anything else. The doctors say she's fine, but she's not fine. Something is wrong. She's not my daughter anymore. She's someone else wearing my daughter's face." I read that email 5 times, 6 times. The words seemed to shimmer on the screen, refusing to make sense and yet making perfect sense at the same time. My mother had known something was wrong. She'd felt it, and she'd written it down and then never spoken of it again. The album didn't have an owner's name inside. There was no bookplate, no inscription. But the back of each photograph had been carefully catalogued in handwriting that was precise and methodical. Names, dates, locations. I cross-referenced them with searches. The woman's name appeared to be Eleanor Hayes. She had lived in the city, my city, until 2003, when she'd apparently moved away. I couldn't find any record of her after that. But the internet was different then, less comprehensive. I tried searching for obituaries. Nothing. I tried searching for her name combined with various keywords: disappeared, dead, missing, accident. Nothing solid. Just a void where Eleanor Hayes should have been. Except for one forum post dated 2015, in an obscure true crime discussion board. A user named TruthSeeker19999 had written, "Looking for information about Eleanor Hayes, female, last known address in my city circa 2003. Believed to have been involved with a group that no longer exists. Any information appreciated. This is urgent." The post had never received a response, and the user had never posted again. I made a list. It sounds absurd, like something from a paranoid thriller, but I made a list. I disappeared for 48 hours when I was 13. I have no memory of those 48 hours. A photo of me exists in someone else's album, dated to that exact day. The woman in the album is dead or gone or intentionally erased. Someone online was looking for her in connection with a group. My mother knew something was fundamentally wrong when I came back. Over the next week, I became obsessed. I called the thrift store and asked if they kept records of where items came from. They didn't. I went back to check if there was anything else from that donation, but the section had been cleaned out. I tried to find Eleanor Hayes' family. I found a sister, also deceased, a brother who'd moved to California and had an unlisted number. I wrote letters that I never sent. I drafted emails I never hit send on. And then, on a Friday night at 2 a.m., I found something. A digitized newspaper microfilm from 2002. A small article easily missed. Local group questions disbanded following allegations. The philosophical collective known as The Seekers, which operated in the area from 1995 to 2002, has disbanded following complaints from former members about unorthodox practices and inappropriate relationships with minors. The organization's founder, Dr. Martin Ridley, could not be reached for comment. Police state they have no evidence of criminal activity. The Seekers, a philosophical collective, unorthodox practices with minors. That was it. That was the piece that slid into place like a key turning in a lock. I found more articles. The Seekers had been a group focused on expanding consciousness and unlocking human potential. They'd operated out of a converted warehouse downtown. They had maybe 200 members at their peak, mostly young adults and teenagers. Ridley had positioned himself as a guru, a spiritual leader who developed methods to enhance intuition and access deeper parts of the mind. What the articles didn't explicitly say, but what I could read between the lines, was that they'd been conducting something like psychological experiments on their members, particularly the younger ones. And Eleanor Hayes had been listed as one of the group's facilitators. Part of me wanted to stop. Part of me wanted to close that laptop, delete my search history, and pretend I'd never found that album. Because in that moment, I understood something that had been hiding in my subconscious for decades. Someone had taken me. Eleanor Hayes or someone like her had taken me to that place. They'd done something to me, something that was important enough to erase from my memory, or for my mind to erase itself in self-protection. But I couldn't stop. Not anymore. Because for the first time in 25 years, I had a name. I had a location. I had proof that the 48 hours I'd been missing weren't a dream or a false memory or teenage dramatics. They were real. They happened. And someone, somewhere, had documented them. That's when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something, intuition, or perhaps that same instinct that had made me pick up the album in the first place, made me pick up. "Is this the person who's been searching for Eleanor Hayes?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, cautious, afraid. "How did you—" I started, but she cut me off. "I've been monitoring forums for that name for years," she said. "Ever since my daughter went missing in 2001. She was with the Seekers, and I think you might be connected to what happened to her. But we need to be very careful about this. Very careful. Because the people involved, they're still out there. And some of them are still very powerful." My entire body went rigid. "What's your name?" I asked. "My name is Patricia. And I think we need to meet. I think you need to know the truth about what happened to you. But more importantly, I think you need to know why they've been documenting you all these years. What do you mean, documenting me? The album you found, Patricia said quietly. That wasn't just Eleanor's hobby, that was a record they kept of successful extractions. And if you're in that album, that means you were one of them. You were part of something, and they wanted to make sure they could find you again if they needed to. The room seemed to tilt. Find me again? I whispered. To finish what they started, Patricia said. And honey, I hate to tell you this, but based on the fact that you just found that album completely by accident, I don't think it was an accident. I think they wanted you to find it. I think they've been waiting for you to be ready. I met Patricia at a coffee shop in a part of town I'd never been before, deliberately far from my apartment, my work, my usual routes. She was sitting at a corner table, and I recognized her immediately even though we'd never met. She had the same expression I'd seen in my mirror that morning, a kind of exhausted vigilance like someone who'd been holding her breath for a very long time. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. She didn't offer her hand for a shake. She just looked at me with eyes that held a lifetime of grief. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure I should have, I replied. I don't know you. You called me with a number that doesn't exist in any database I can find. You know things about my past that I barely know. So before we go any further, I need to know, are you actually real or am I experiencing some kind of psychotic break? She smiled sadly. That's a fair question, and I understand the paranoia. The Seekers, they trained their facilitators well. They taught them how to make people doubt their own perception of reality. It's actually a central technique. Make someone question whether what they're experiencing is real, and you can convince them to accept almost anything. My daughter, Catherine, she was only 15 when she went to them. She spent 3 years in that group. When she came out, she could barely recognize herself. What happened to her? I asked. Patricia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. She killed herself, she said flatly. 2 years after she left the group, she said she couldn't live with the knowledge of what she'd done while she was under their influence, what they'd made her do. I never got the whole story. She left a note, but it was fragmented, not coherent. She mentioned names of other people who'd been extracted. That was their term. Extraction. They'd bring people in, reprogram them, train them to do things, and then release them back into society as sleeper agents, basically. I felt my chest tighten. Sleeper agents for what? Recruitment, Patricia said. That was the primary function. The Seekers weren't just a cult. They were a recruitment pipeline. They'd identify vulnerable young people. Kids whose parents were busy, kids with emotional issues, kids looking for belonging. They'd bring them in, they'd manipulate them psychologically, they'd train them, and then they'd release them back into the world as recruiters. The goal was exponential growth. But they disbanded in 2002, I said. The public face disbanded, Patricia corrected. But the structure remained. The people at the top, Ridley and a few others, they went underground. They didn't stop the work. They just got smarter about it, more subtle. They started placing their people in positions of influence. Teachers, counselors, youth workers, social media influencers. They learned that you don't need a building to exert control. You just need access. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process. Why are you telling me this? Why contact me now? Because my daughter mentioned your name, Patricia said. In her final note, she wrote, they're looking for the girl they lost, the one from '98. She escaped the programming somehow. They think she's defective, but I think she's the only one who got away clean. If she ever wakes up, she could bring them down. The words hung in the air between us like an accusation. I didn't escape anything, I said. I have no memories. I don't know what they did to me. I don't know what programming you're talking about. Because they tried to erase it, Patricia said. And it worked mostly. But something in you resisted. Something in you said no. That's actually rarer than you'd think. Most people, they accept the new architecture they're given. They live their lives thinking they're making free choices when really they're just following a program. But you broke the program. Then why did I come back at all? I demanded. Why didn't they just kill me and dispose of the body? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Because you were special, she finally said. You were the first one they tried something new on. A deep hypnotic suggestion combined with a cognitive restructuring technique. They were testing it, and it failed. You broke through after 48 hours. They panicked. They couldn't have a failed extraction walking around who might remember something, so they sent you home with a block, hoping that the suggestion would eventually take hold, that you'd either complete the programming yourself subconsciously, or you'd eventually come back to them for more work. And did I? I asked. Come back to them? No, Patricia said. You were one of the few who didn't. You built a life. You got away. But they've always been watching. They've always known where you were. The album you found wasn't an accident. Someone placed it there deliberately. It was a test. A test of what? Of whether you were ready, Patricia said. Ready to remember, ready to come back, ready to join them again, except this time as one of the facilitators. They've learned that people who've been extracted successfully make the best recruiters. They understand both sides. They know how to manipulate because they've been manipulated. I stood up abruptly. I'm not going back to anything. I'm calling the police. With what? Patricia asked calmly. An old photo? A disbanded organization with no paper trail? News articles that mention nothing specific? The police investigated the Seekers in 2002. They found nothing prosecutable, and the people running it now are too careful to leave evidence. I sat back down. Because she was right. I had nothing. Nothing but a photograph, an album, and the word of a stranger. So what do you want from me? I asked. I want you to help me find them, Patricia said. I want you to go back to them. Let them think you're ready to rejoin. Get close to the core group. Find out where they're keeping records, where they're operating from, what they're doing now. And then we bring everything down together. You're asking me to volunteer for psychological manipulation, I said. To put myself back in the hands of people who've already hurt me once. I'm asking you to be the person Catherine thought you were, Patricia replied. The one who got away clean, the one who could bring them down. I'm asking you to reclaim your power. I looked at this woman across the table from me, this stranger whose daughter had died because of the same people who'd stolen my memories, and I understood that she was asking me to do something that terrified me. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I was afraid of what I might discover about myself in the process. That night, I went home and I made a decision. I contacted the person I found online, Truthseeker 1999. It took me hours to track down their original email address, but I found it through archived forum registration data. I wrote, I found Eleanor's album. I'm in it. I'm ready to talk. The response came within minutes. A video chat link. No explanation, just a link. I opened it, and on the other side was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes. He was sitting in what looked like a small office, very carefully lit so that nothing in the background was visible. You're the girl from 1998, he said. It wasn't a question. Who are you? I asked. Someone who got out, he replied. Someone like you, someone who broke the program and has spent the last 25 years trying to undo the damage. My name is James, and I've been waiting for Eleanor's album to surface for a very long time. I put it in that thrift store. I led you to it. Why? Because you needed to remember, he said. Because the work they have planned, it's bigger now than it's ever been. And because you're not just a victim in this story. You're the key. You were always meant to be the key. They just made a mistake in how they tried to program you. Over the next weeks, I entered a world I never knew existed. James introduced me to others who'd escaped the Seekers. We formed a kind of collective ourselves, not spiritual or cult-like, but investigative. We pooled resources and knowledge. We hacked databases. We uncovered names and operations and connections that the authorities had never known to look for. And slowly, the picture became clear. The Seekers hadn't disbanded. They'd evolved. They had facilitators working in social services, in law enforcement, in education, in tech companies. They'd embedded themselves into the infrastructure of society itself, and they were recruiting more sophisticated every day, using social media algorithms, using psychological profiling, using the very technologies that were supposed to liberate us. The album Eleanor had kept wasn't just a hobby. It was a catalog of successful extractions, and when I looked at the other faces in it, carefully preserved in that leather album, I realized that I recognized some of them. They were people I'd gone to school with, people who'd had nervous breakdowns or suddenly changed their personalities or disappeared for months and came back different. We gathered evidence, we prepared reports, and then, carefully and strategically, we went to the FBI. The investigation took 18 months. It was methodical and thorough. And on a cold March morning, Federal agents moved on 12 locations across 4 states. They arrested 23 people, including Dr. Martin Ridley himself. They seized computers and files and documentation that had been hidden in safes and buried encryption protocols. I testified 3 times. Each time I had to sit across from Dr. Ridley in a courtroom and recount what had happened to me, even though I still couldn't remember it. I testified based on hypnotherapy sessions, on recovered memories, on the accounts of others. I testified on behalf of people I'd never met, but who had been harmed in similar ways. The trial lasted 8 months. 6 of the defendants pleaded guilty to lesser charges. The rest went to trial. Ridley was convicted on 23 counts, including fraud, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, and psychological manipulation of minors. He was sentenced to 40 years. He died in prison 2 years later of a heart attack. Eleanor Hayes' brother came forward after the convictions. He told me that Eleanor had been devastated by what she'd done for the organization. She'd tried to leave in 2003, and they'd made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. She'd been under their control until 2015, when she'd finally managed to escape. She'd lived quietly, alone, trying to atone for the people she'd hurt. She'd died of cancer in 2018. She'd never told anyone about me specifically, but in her will she'd left instructions for her personal effects to be donated. The album was among them. James, who'd been investigating her, had intercepted it and placed it where I would find it. Patricia and I remained friends. Catherine's name was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. She was recognized as a victim, not a perpetrator. Patricia established a foundation in her daughter's name to help people who'd been extracted from groups like the Seekers. And me? I didn't go back to my normal life, because I realized that my normal life had never been mine. It had been built on a foundation of stolen time and hidden trauma. So instead, I chose something different. I became an advocate. I spoke at universities about manipulation and control. I worked with cult survivors. I helped develop psychological screening tools to identify people who'd been subjected to intensive manipulation. The 48 hours I'd lost when I was 13, I never got them back. I never will. There are parts of my memory that remain blank, and I've learned to accept that. But I discovered that sometimes, the most powerful reclamation of your own story isn't about recovering what was taken. It's about building something new with what remains. The photo in Eleanor's album still exists. It's in a federal archive now, evidence in a case that closed 5 years ago. But I keep a copy, not as a reminder of what was done to me, but as a reminder of who I became after. That girl in the basement, under the fluorescent lights, making a smile she wasn't sure belonged to her face. She survived. She broke through, and she eventually learned how to reclaim her own power. Sometimes I think about Eleanor, and I don't feel anger. I feel something more complicated. She was a victim too in her own way, but that doesn't excuse what she did, and it doesn't change the fact that I had to face her, confront her memory, and ultimately forgive her. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because holding on to the hatred, the betrayal, the sense of violation, it was just another way of letting them control me. And I refused to give them that power anymore.